Hello, bonjour. My name is Dr. Christine Wekerle, and I'm a researcher from McMaster University. And I'm very happy to be here in Montreal with CRIPCAS and have this opportunity to collaborate with your researchers, and wonderful that you are a partner for us in our CHR Team SV grant studying sexual violence in boys and men's health. And generally, I'm in the area of child maltreatment and prevention, and currently am the editor-in-chief of Child Abuse and Neglect Journal. One of the things that we may not realize as a society is that males can be victims of sexual violence also. It's just something that we may think males are the perpetrators of sexual violence, but we don't realize that males can be victimized. And there's many more gender issues that dampen a male's feeling of comfort or willingness to disclose that they have been a victim. That taps into the lower likelihood that they feel they can go seek mental health services or confide in their friend group. And this can lead to some very serious consequences. We know that males commit suicide at higher rates than females, and that there's a clearly higher issue for substance abuse and intimate partner violence. So that it's really important that we are able to offer to male victims this message that we are listening, we are willing to listen, and what you have to say is important, and you are never alone. So the Lancet also is trying to push forward this importance of adolescence. From their point of view, focusing on adolescence can provide you with this triple dividend. You can support youth mental health and wellness now while they're in adolescence. There's an opportunity to support, if you're supporting them now as adolescents, you'll have better adult well-being. And also supporting the adolescent now has implications for them as parents, if they're an adolescent parent, or in the future as parents. So the Lancet and others have put this huge push on adolescents, in part because there's just a huge number of adolescents now. And adolescent health is really important for preventing those other public health goals like non-communicable diseases, like diabetes, and supporting the sustainable development goals, the rights of youth to education, to a violence-free life. And I'm sure you've heard about in U.S., it's more well-known, but Ben mentioned it in his talk, the Adverse Childhood Events, or ACEs. And the ACEs are 10 items, 5 of which are child maltreatment, and the rest are household dysfunction, but really they're parental care, they're primarily caregiver vulnerabilities, whether there's mental health, there's substance use, there's incarceration, for example. And they take a cumulative approach where 4+ ACE events that score, that threshold, mean certain things. So a 4+, can you see the pointer when I do that? Maybe yes, maybe no. Well, looking to the triangle, the rectangle, what we see is that 4+ ACEs increase the risks of poor outcome, not just in the non-communicable diseases, but also in terms of financial health. So you are at higher risk for financial poor outcomes like lack of assets, lower levels of education or training, longer levels of unemployment, long-term sicknesses and absences from work. Hughes, in 2017, did a meta-analysis of all these 4+ ACEs studies and wanted to quantify what you're at higher risk for. So you're 3 times more likely to experience anxiety, depression, 5 times more likely to experience sexual transmitted infections, 5 to 10 times more likely to experience substance abuse, 7 times more likely to experience relationship violence, and 30 times more likely to experience suicide attempts. So it really has drawn attention to the idea of the essentialness of trauma-informed approaches in services, in schools, in policy, in justice. And the circle diagram that you're seeing, it has really in the center the ecological model of the child, the family, the service that they may be in, perhaps child welfare and beyond. And then the top are looking at things that, how to support families, and the bottom 3 are about resilience. And I think one of the orphans in this is really, oops, that didn't work, is really dating violence, is kind of an orphan in this ecological model. And ACEs are generally historical, but they do ask about while growing up, and dating violence isn't in that. And in Ontario, the age of child welfare is covered now up to 18. So it's no longer 16, it's up to 18. So if you're a Crown ward and the government is your guardian, I think you are responsible for intervening in adolescent dating violence. So I know Martine does a lot of work, and she can talk to what's going on in Quebec, but I'm just wanting to put that message out there. Also, when we talk about adolescence, we have to understand how shifting adolescence has been in terms of the gender norm socialization in the last 10 years, in the last 5 years, and we do need to understand the context for adolescence. So that early adolescence, 10 to 14, is a really good time to address gender norms, to help youth towards more healthy social expectations, more inclusive social expectations, so that we can have these sustainable development goals of equity and health achieved by 2030, which is their target date. So when we look at sex differences, young boys, their top cause of death is road injury and drowning. When they're older, it becomes interpersonal violence. And boys in the full adolescent age range are more likely than girls to have both early sexual debut, early sex, and unprotected sex as the general populations. In 2018, I know this is a topical event, there was a meta-analysis to look at sexting, and about 30% of youth engaged in sexting, and 12% are sexting without consent, i.e. a picture's taken, and they're not doing this with consent. And the thing with sexting is that, you might like to use something like Snapchat, because you can send the picture at a certain time span that it would be active only a certain time, and then it would go away. Except for youth can screenshot that, and then now they have it. So it's really important to educate about privacy concerns, implications, your digital footprint. If we're not really having these conversations with youth now, then we don't really understand what they're facing. So because I have a bunch of nieces and nephews and 5 kids, I have like this little reference group. So I can understand that there's expectations around sex acts. This girl's supposed to do certain sex acts by grade 6. They're supposed to have done this. By grade 7, they're supposed to have done that. By grade 8, they have done that. Like, and there's nobody, unless you know it, there's nobody there to challenge it. You don't have to do anything except for pay your taxes and die. The global, there's a lot of discussion around, are we really having good discussions around what is masculinity, what is femininity, how do we approach these things? And the Global Early Adolescent Study did ask kids about these words in 15 countries, and they felt boys was synonymous with toughness, physical strength, competitiveness, not to act like a girl, and needing to demonstrate manhood by having sex with many girls. That's what they found. Boys and girls reported that. In our team grant, we really want to focus on the most taboo of taboo topics. If child sexual abuse is a taboo topic, then male victims are the most taboo topic because of all those masculine expectations that we just looked at in the slide before, and all that, how difficult it is then to disclose because of fears of people learning about it and what implications that might have, and also what the perpetrators directly tell them. Remember, they directly tell lies and mindsets that are harmful. So one of our team members, Elizabeth Saywick, did a review of sexual exploitation studies in both, looking at both high-income and low-income countries, and they found 22 studies, and the rates of sexual exploitation was higher, much higher in the low-income country. And I think you saw that although Ben this morning didn't go through what those countries were, that was represented in his diagrams. And the risk factors were home breakdown, born outside of the country, substance abuse, and identification as homosexual or bisexual. And they did look at some of the qualitative studies and found that, some of this is kids seeing the poverty and saying that they're helping out to bring money into the home. So I think that's another important area, is to understand how they perceive the behaviors and who's telling them, who's informing that perception. So this is, our team grant is now at its sort of halfway point, and we put together a video about all of the sort of findings to date. The second leg of our team grant is going to be focused on interventions, and there's a number of different types of interventions. Delphine's doing the ARC model, and I'm working on a resilience app that I'll give you some, do that, a little bit of that at the end. So we're ending with resilience, not trauma.
Child sexual abuse, or CSA, is often the elephant in the room. Everyone knows it's a serious issue, but it remains a difficult conversation to have. Research is one place to start. While female victimization may be more common, male victimization is a huge modern-day issue. Male victims don't disclose their CSA histories easily or willingly, so having a comfortable support network around them is vital. But to form this, we need to ask ourselves, are we ready to listen? For too long, males have felt discouraged to reveal their stories of child sexual violence. Perhaps we've been a part of the problem by not counteracting gender myths like boys can't be sexually assaulted, or stereotypes about how unmasculine it is to seek help. Fortunately, a Canadian Institutes of Health research team have stepped up to be a part of the solution by opening the conversation. Using a hashtag #CIHRTeamSV social media campaign, they have targeted stigma around sexual violence in males and have mobilized new knowledge. So far, several interesting findings have come from using large-scale data sets. At the point of reporting to child welfare agencies, caseworkers were less likely to note that male victims experienced emotional harm as compared to females. Male victims were also less likely to be placed in out-of-home care. This is a disconnect to the research that showed persistent post-traumatic stress symptoms for many male victims. Following up victims 5 years after the CSA report was substantiated, male victims were 2.2 times less likely to see a physician for physical health than female victims. However, males were 2.3 times more likely to see a physician for mental health problems. Compared to the general population, male victims also experienced a 10-fold increased risk of being hospitalized for health issues. But how does having this background affect other areas, such as dating in adolescence? A high school survey found that 21% of girls and 5% of boys reported experiencing CSA. And of those affected, 1/5 reported experiencing sexual coercion from their dating partners. This tells us that consent and sexual negotiation skills seem important targets to protect youth from re-victimization. So, where do we go from here? There are at least 4 pathways forward. 1. Taking sex and gender into account will keep us focused on the "what about the boys" issue. 2. Trauma and violence-informed healthcare is critical, especially in males. 3. Service providers must ensure safety in young people's environments and relationships. 4. Public health needs to tackle sexual violence as it has with other forms of violence. Without support, victims become even more isolated, leaving their health to suffer. We cannot let that happen. Fortunately, research is guiding us on how to prevent this. And, as a result, the elephant is finally out of the room.
So what is the maltreatment and adolescent pathway study? This was the first Canadian child welfare study to track adolescent outcomes over time, where we tested youth at 6-month intervals to the 2 to 3 year time point. We had a multidisciplinary team of epidemiology, child welfare, pediatrics, psychiatry, psychology, social work, and trainees. The catchment age range was from 14 to 17, so we would be able to pick up on those adolescent entry to behaviors. And one of the features that was unique was that youth were randomly selected from the open caseload of 3 urban child welfare agencies, the largest in Canada. In general, their average age was 16. And in total, 561 youth were assessed. About 2/3 were Crown wards, or the government was their parent. In Ontario, I don't believe it's the case in Quebec, parental rights are terminated. And it's about even in terms of sex representation. And about 1/3 identified as biracial or multiracial. And we use both caseworker reports of maltreatment and youth self-report. The outcomes we focused on were mental health, substance use, dating violence, other health indices like sleep, and resilience. So I'm not going to go through all those outcomes, but really just focus on looking at MAP youth who had the background of child sexual abuse versus not. So we're taking a gender and trauma-informed approach. People may have seen the genderbread person. And at the top, the trauma response of fight, flight, freeze, and faint really applies to any kind of behavior in terms of what the youth may choose to respond to when it's triggering or reminding them of their experiences. And it can be, we know that the triggers can be quite subtle. It can be a scent. It can be a season. These can be quite subtle. And then when someone acts out, it's understandable that people do not understand what's going on. But that's the trauma-informed approach, is to be mindful of that. History has occurred, and that means that we have more of a compassionate approach and want to model compassion to engender self-compassion in the youth. So in terms of the MAP youth who were sexually active, who reported that they were sexually active, of the 561 in total, there was 53% overall. Just slightly more females reported being sexually active than the males. The vast majority report themselves as heterosexual, having their age at first sex as less than 15 years old, more males than females, so that conforms to those larger population statistics I mentioned earlier. Having 3 or more sex partners, remember we're talking here on average age 16. Child sexual abuse, youth with those histories were more likely to have 3 or more sex partners than non-CSA youth. And having sex with someone who was not known to you or not well known to you, males were more likely than females. And the caseworkers do a very dedicated job about pregnancy prevention, right, and STI prevention. So the majority of kids, males included, do use protection, which is probably unlike the A population, non-child welfare general population. So this didn't work out again. I had fixed the numbers and then they shifted again. So I'll just have to go through to give you a sense of what the sexual violence was. For nearly half of the females and males, it was fondling. Almost half of females responded to the childhood trauma questionnaire item, I was molested. And the next bit of numbers is interesting because, because there's a question, they have behavior-based questions, and then they have a perceptual question. So they say, I was sexually abused, and they would say yes or no. So only 55% of the females, even though they had maybe ticked off I was molested or other items, I was fondled, agreed with the sentence, I was sexually abused. And 41% of the males agreed with the sentence, I was sexually abused. Because, of course, everything's relative until you learn more. And for those who've worked clinically, have heard all sorts of rationales that are given to the victim. All the daddies in this country do this with their children. I'm just teaching you about sex, and if I don't, you won't know what you're doing. These kinds of rationales we know about. So we decided in the MAP study to ask youth why they were having sex, and this is a sexual motive questionnaire. So this is from Lynn Cooper, has all sorts of motive questionnaires, and they're organized into whether they are positive or negative motive. So it's for positive reasons like having sex to feel good or feel better about yourself, some kind of enhancement. The reasons for having sex can be internal for the person or external, like from the environment. So a positive external is to feel closer to the partner or for intimacy. In terms of the negative, having sex to cope with my own negative affect, and having sex to conform, like peer pressures. So some items would be like the partner would get angry if I didn't have sex. Friends are having sex to gain peer approval. So these are the motives. And we were interested in this model, this paper's out, in looking at child sexual abuse history and then the adolescent risky sexual behaviors, and wondering if there are reasons for having sex. So consciously, they're telling us this is why they're having sex, not, unconscious things that may be happening in attachment or whatever. And we were looking at whether the negative motives, coping motives, partner approval motives, and peer motives would hold for males and females. Just to go through the youth report, when we talk about child sexual abuse, we're talking about all other types of abuse because it's kind of a red flag to have higher levels of all other forms of abuse. And in particular, males with CSA had higher levels of emotional abuse and exposure to verbal intimate partner violence. That distinguished, so this is what, when a male is reporting their sexual abuse history, they're also coming with these other things. So we found that this model actually held best for males, that CSA was related to having sex for coping, was related to having sex to get your partner's approval, and was relating to having sex to get your peer approval. And for females, having sex for coping was also related to their risky behavior. And in terms of when you look at this, what is the sort of the mediator? The mediator that came out is really coping motives. So having sex to cope helps that, helps explain the relationship between CSA and risky sexual behaviors. So then the question becomes, well, what else can we do for youth so they're not going to the quick fix of sex or the quick fix of substance use or the quick fix of self-harm to cope with negative emotions? And that's where we're bringing forward this idea of resilience. And so I'm going to just hoop this shows, because we talk about the risk and resilience in the MAP study findings. It's not, right?
Adolescence is a critical period of development for the adolescent brain and their behaviors. It is a window of expected risk-taking. For youth living in adverse contexts, that can become taking risks with their physical and mental health. The Ontario provincial and Canadian federal government supported a research study to learn from youth. The Maltreatment and Adolescent Pathways, MAP, research team's goal was to better understand how youth with abuse and neglect experiences while growing up were doing as they were receiving governmental service supports like child welfare. To give these youth a voice, recognizing the importance of their lived experience to our body of knowledge on adolescent health, and to guide policymakers and service organizations on how they can provide a better service to needs match. The MAP study has generated several important findings. First, several youth experience violence in their dating relationships. Over 30% of teens receiving child protection services reported experiencing dating violence, from verbally abusive comments to pushing, shoving, kicking, hitting, to sexual coercion. About 15% of teens showed persistent dating violence over a 3-year period, from about age 15 to 18. This suggests that adolescence is an important window of opportunity to teach about new ways of relating. Second, youth who had received services over years and were living out of their family of origin home reported less dating violence in their lives. Services and role models for healthy relating seem to make a difference. An interesting question is what else can make for more resilience? The MAP study found that youth with higher self-compassion had lower dating violence, and also fewer health risk behaviors like suicidal thinking, substance use problems, and depression or anxious moods. When you can support youth to see their abuse or neglect as not their fault, their mistakes as part of a learning process, to uplift rather than put down, and take a big picture view of life, there are many positives. For MAP study youth, positive self-talk, creating a positive social network, feeling connected, and making healthy dating choices are all part of doing well. Adolescence is a critical window of opportunity. MAP research shows that the most important relationships are being kind to others, and especially yourself. To learn more about our resilience research, email us, visit us online, and follow us on Twitter.
So that did not, the MAP findings, just to be clear about it, does not apply to Indigenous youth. The area that we sample from has its own Native Child and Family Services that were invited but didn't participate in the MAP study because it did require a great deal of resources to even participate as an agency in this study. And So just to make sure we're clear on what that it is and is not saying. So now we move over to shifting gears now to talk about resilience, in that we know that youth have two key issues: emotion regulation, how they manage their emotions. We've just seen that managing negative emotions is challenging, but also the idea that maybe they don't have enough opportunities for positive affect. When you talk about child maltreatment in the home, it's not just the negative things that happened, it's also those opportunities to practice your pro-social skills. And in the context of child sexual abuse, you are saying at some point no, but your assertiveness skills is being trained out of you because you're not effective in your environment. So we want to have resilience that does have a positive affect focus. And if it does at all look at negative affect, there should be within an app the action for it. So these are things about when you feel anxious to go outside, and these are all relevant, but because youth are looking for a quick fix, the solution has to be within the app. And so some of the evidence-based strategies that help with organizing your thinking and organizing your emotions, emotion literacy, being able to label emotions, things like journaling, gaming, especially for boys, art and puzzles. And what we really want to be sure, given the sexting kinds of things and discussions we've had before, is that we do find a way to utilize the top resilience factor, which is relationships and social connecting, but we want safe social connecting. That has to be the priority, and that's what trauma-informed priority is, that it's safety, psychological and personal safety is put first. So there's, Tetris came to my attention because there was being a fair bit of research being done on Tetris as a game. And it certainly seems to target cognitive organization. If you don't know Tetris, these blocks come down and you manipulate the shape to fit in. And so in that way, it can be a positive distraction. It can also then work towards emotion regulation, because now you're doing something that's just sort of productive and allowing the emotions to settle. Playing Tetris has been linked to decreasing traumatic memory flashbacks when they've done this with veterans, and it has positive impacts on spatial working memory. So we've looked at this, creating this app. We're working with the company now, and research will begin in September, and it's called Joy Pop. So the idea, joie, is that joy? Yeah. So that you would have a pop of joie through your day. We're looking at the 17 to 21 year range, and we can see it being useful for a range of applications. Again, it falls within our team grant that we have, by definition, a bit more resilient population of undergraduates that we're interested in, child welfare youth, as well as Indigenous youth. An app is a resource that could go to a remote or rural, youth transitioning in systems. And this kind of an app could be useful as potentially in some populations as a standalone. It could be useful potentially when you have long wait lists and you're not doing anything for them until they get to see their therapist. It could potentially be an adjunct to whatever intervention you are doing, because if you're doing intervention, you're seeing them once, maybe twice in a week. So this could be sort of the bridge, a carrier for them. And then when intervention is finished, as we saw from Isabel's work and looking at populations, 5 years later, they're having troubles. So that this might be something that carries them past their intervention. So it starts off with the idea that happiness starts with you, and that you have agency. You always have agency over your mindset. Things happen to your body, but you will always have agency over your mindset. And mindsets matter, and I think that's shown out in the literature. And our color scheme is trying to be happy with kind of like water and sun, and I'm not sure how well you see it, or it's quite big, but the first screen, you get to see all the activities. There's a calendar where you can, because youth told us a calendar was important. The smiley face is doing your happiness ratings. Journaling is the book. The 4 squares are our activities that would include Tetris, and the bottom circle is our circle of trust, the safe connecting. And we want to be very mindful about, in working with this, to avoid unintended negative consequences. So when you went to some other apps and they asked to do a mood rating, they just kind of took a Likert scale and stuck it on the app, so you would actually see yourself go down to -7 or up to +7. So if you're always looking like me, -7, that's giving you negative messaging, right? So no wonder kids do engage in mental health apps, but it's very difficult to keep them engaged. So we were really trying to look at, what kind of design. Everything would be interactive. Everything you do here would be interactive. So the second screen is like the mood rating. How happy are you today? And they just slide up and down like it's as if this is water. And if they would hit like 50% happiness or less, they would pop over to look at what negative emotions are going on for them. And they would rate that, and that would pop them over to the activities page and suggest doing a breathing exercise. So with this app, right from the very beginning, as soon as they open it, they would get a breathing exercise. If you've seen those GIFs where it goes, inhale, exhale, if you've seen those, so it would start with that. So you're right off getting something positive, deep breathing. And if you're 50% or above, you would get like reinforcement, way to go, you're on the right track. And after a negative rating, you can go back to your happiness rating, see if those things worked, and then you will come back to the landing screen. So this gives you a couple more screens. The first one is, you see a motivation, a journaling. Actually, the first one is a journaling. You might have a prompt for journaling. It's just searching for things to be grateful for is what's impactful. And at the bottom, it's very faint, but you can take a picture of something around you. You could emoji your journal. Before you go on any app, it's called onboarding. It goes through sort of the training, and we would recommend that you're not taking selfies and things like that, so that we maintain privacy as much in the app. Oh, sorry. And then the second you have some art activities and some puzzles. The head is breathing again, and the other thing is Tetris. And with the circle of trust, you're in the middle, and you can input who are your safety people. It could be your caseworker if you have one. So you can identify some as emergency contacts, and you can preload the message like, I'm having a really tough time right now, can you call me? When that would you would go to call, it would take you out of the app though, so you'd have to come back into the app. And at the top, it's probably a little hard to see, but on the far right is like the help lines. So if at any time you need help, and that would be explained in the onboarding, you can go and hit Kids Help Phone, Good to Talk, which is for college youth, suicide hotline, or whatever the hotlines that are entered in there. So that's what we're working on, and I hope you connect with me on either Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. Most of my PowerPoints are on SlideShare and LinkedIn. So thank you very much. There is the link for the project. Merci beaucoup.